what happened, but Tucker Carlson has created this 9/11 docuseries, which was supposed to be released Thursday. And from what I can tell, and maybe I'm just missing something, I checked the website and the docuseries is not released. So maybe there's like a pushback, maybe there's technical difficulties, or I often wonder, did someone speak to Tucker Carlson? Did somebody call him? Did he get a talking to? Is what I'm asking. Because he did talk about this docuseries on Piers Morgan's show, and this goes with the poll question there. What do you guys believe about the 9/11 narrative? There are 3 parts in this conversation I want to tap into. Let's go ahead and get started here.
So Tucker, the biggest lies perpetrated on the American people from 9/11?
Well, the core lie is the 9/11 Commission itself, which was an instrument, a political instrument of the Bush administration run by a guy called Philip Zelikow. And from beginning to end, he stage managed the explanation for 9/11 in a way that benefited the neoconservative factions within the Bush administration. The point was to leverage the pain and outrage of that day and use it to convince Americans that we ought to invade Iraq, which of course had nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. And he wrote the commission report with that in mind. And by the way, he wrote it before the investigation took place. He literally sketched it out before they knew what the facts were. And then during the course of the investigation, he systematically, I'm not guessing, by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the testimony of people who are directly involved in the commission. Chairman Tom Kean, the former governor of New Jersey, Republican governor, he stage managed the entire thing and prevented investigators from looking into like core questions. For example, the CIA was fully aware that many of the hijackers who committed 9/11 were in the United States. They had followed them, as the trailer suggests, around the world. 11 out of the 19 hijackers had visas for travel to the United States issued in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, at exactly the moment that John Brennan was the station chief for the CIA in Saudi Arabia. They knew that they were here. They didn't hide the fact that they were here. I mean,
pause here for just a second. There was a series I watched a couple of years ago on Hulu. It was called The Looming Tower. I'm not sure if you have seen it. If it's still there, you should definitely check it out. That was in the show The Looming Tower, right? So it wasn't a docuseries, but it was like, just like a drama series about it. And what I did is while I was watching each episode, after each episode, I would just kind of, research myself to see what was real and what was exaggerated. Because even in these, like, this episode is based on a true story. Even with those, sometimes there are dramatic events that are added there just for entertainment aspect. And so I always check those episodes after I watch them to see what in that episode actually happened and what was just added for entertainment value. And one of the things that really took me by surprise was what Tucker Carlson had just mentioned, that the CIA did in fact know that they were already here in the country. That was the first time I heard that when I watched that show. And I saw that show maybe 6 years ago. I forget. It's been a while. Why didn't more people know about that? And why didn't more people ask questions about that? So they knew all this time that they were here, but they did nothing about it. Furthermore, they did not give that information to the FBI. So this is the reason why, one of the reasons why people do have questions about what really happened that day. And I don't think you should call those people nut jobs or whacks or conspiracists. I think that you should sit back and maybe ask yourself why you aren't asking any damn questions. Why was some of this information hidden from you? Why was it kept from you? Why are we finding out things years later that was totally omitted from the conversation at that point in time? I mean, come on. Let's not forget, they lied to you about the Iraq War. They told you Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, but you believe everything they tell you today? Wake up, people.
Khalid al-Mihdhar, who was a 26-year-old Saudi with the plane that hit the Pentagon, was in the San Diego phone book And he was being followed by the CIA. I mean, this is all documented, and not just by the CIA, by foreign intel services, probably the British, possibly the French, definitely the Israelis. They knew. Now, I'm not alleging that they committed 9/11, but I am stating, because it's a fact, that they were aware the hijackers were in the US and were planning a terror attack against the United States. And they never passed that information to the FBI, to local police, much less to the American public. And 3,000 people died as a result. So what is that? Huge parts of the 9/11 story were left out of the commission report. For example, what happened to Building 7, which was not only not next to the Twin Towers, which were hit by airplanes, but had a building in between itself and those buildings, collapsed that afternoon for reasons that no one has been able to explain since. You're not a lunatic for asking. There is no there's no plausible explanation for how that building collapsed.
Well, so let's talk
That's
about
not
that.
even mentioned.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment,
Yes.
because it's one of the many things that have raged since. If you look into the investigation into Tower 7, the findings of the investigation into it were that the North Tower, when it came down, had set off a load of fires in Building 7. And it was a steel structure and shouldn't have gone down, but it did. That these fires burned all afternoon, and I think it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something. The tower eventually gave way to the welter of fires raging inside it, and it was the only time that had happened to a structure that was built in that way. However, there has been another tower very similar to that in structure, which has since gone down in Tehran. So it's no longer the only one. In other words, there is another example of a tower like that collapsing. So when it comes to the specific theory about that, what is the alternative explanation? I mean, if you're examining another theory other than the one that the investigation concluded was simply that the North Tower came down, fires were set off in Tower 7, and then it eventually collapsed, what is the other theory which we should give more credence to?
I don't know. I don't know that the onus is on me or anyone who seeks the truth about what happened to come up with an alternative theory. The onus is on federal authorities to explain why, for example, they never investigated it. Why, for example, the rubble and the steel from that building was carted off within hours and sent out of the country to Asia. Why, for example, an analysis done not by kooks, but by chemists found traces of explosive material in the dust from that day. Why structural engineers who have kind of no skin in this game came to the conclusion that that just couldn't happen based on all available evidence. And that none of that is addressed at all or even mentioned in the 9/11 report. So, and there are all kinds of anomalies, as I know that you're fully aware, and there are possible explanations to explain all of them. For example, the BBC report on air saying the building had fallen when it hadn't fallen yet. There are all sorts of reasons to wonder, like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, let's talk about this for just a second. I don't know if every one of you watching some of you may not have been born at that time. It's interesting because sometimes it seems like it was just yesterday. But I remember that day very, very well. I remember I was going to class, and I remember that I ran into one of my friends who told me not to move to New York, not to go to New York or something. I was like, what are you talking about? And that was just in passing. I hadn't turned on the TV. It's just this thing that I do. Like when I'm getting ready in the morning, I don't turn on the TV because it's a distraction for me. I didn't find out until I got to class when people were talking about it. And that's when it hit me like, okay, I should probably look at the news. Like I really was in the dark. But I do remember the buildings like coming down. And even then, to me, it was so hard for me to believe it at first because it looked like a movie, right? And I remember, getting on the phone and calling everyone that I know that either worked in the city or lived in the city. There were other attacks also. People that I knew that were near, like Walter Reed, I tried to contact. But I'm not an engineer, so I can't dive into, well, this is what I think really happened with those. I really don't know when it comes to the structural engineering. But I will say people have a right to ask questions. And it seems like to me with this docuseries, based on what I've heard about it, and I saw the trailer, it seems like It's a series of interviews where he talked to people that were directly involved in either the investigation or maybe were in the area at that point in time. So it doesn't seem like it's just something he made where he's like, let me just sit down and tell you what I think happened, like that type of thing. And it's weird to me that we still till this day have people in this country that tell us we shouldn't question what happened in any major event when our government has lied to us so many times. Like all in all, none of these things really made sense to me. The CIA knew that they were in the country, but they decided not to do anything about it. Why not? Why would they not do anything about it? Why would they not even give that information to the FBI? Right? So there's so many things with this particular situation that I never really got the answers to.
But it's not incumbent on us to provide explanation. It's incumbent on the people running the government and running the supposed investigation into this to tell us, like, what was that? And
I mean, look, I have a very open mind. The reason I'm interested to watch your documentary series, I have a genuinely open mind, and actually, I would say it's been more opened generally about this kind of thing since the COVID pandemic. That I was too, I think, credulous about what the authorities were saying through the pandemic to my detriment. You and I have had this conversation. So I'm actually have a very open mind about this. I mean, on the specifics, for example, the BBC report you mentioned was based on a false Reuters report that they retracted soon afterwards and said it shouldn't have gone out. And the building, you could see the building behind the BBC journal. So it was obviously ludicrous. CNN did the same thing. But having been in the news game as you have, on big breaking news stories, fog of war stuff happens. And if it was a genuine error by Reuters, okay. I remember, for example, just as a comparison, I remember being on air at CNN when the hurricane came through, Hurricane Sandy burst through Manhattan. I don't know if you were probably at Fox then, I think. But if you remember, half the lights went out in Lower Manhattan. And I remember a report coming from CNN that the stock exchange was underwater. And that had an immediate impact on global markets. And it turned out that was a false report. So these things can happen. U.S. national debt is more than...
We're not going to do your ad, Pierce. Yeah, those things can happen. I'm not sure if that was a fair comparison. Hurricane Sandy, comparing that to 9/11. I want to get to this part here as well.
Well, we know that people did know more than we've been told. I mean, somebody shorted the airlines and a bunch of the banks that were affected. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a guess. This is publicly available information. Now, the FBI found out the identity of the person or institution that shorted these events on 9/11 and made a huge amount of money by doing that, but never released that information. So why can't we know who clearly had foreknowledge? I mean, if you're shorting American Airlines a week before 9/11, when no one knows it's coming, I think you should have to explain why you did that. And if you're shorting Barclays and banks that were affected by 9/11, why can't we know who you are? These are public markets, by the way. This is not private equity. This is publicly traded equities. So I wonder about that. So clearly, yes, there was foreknowledge. By the way, there was a team. This is according to the FBI, by the way. This is the FBI saying there was a team of clearly intel-connected foreigners who were arrested after 9/11, as you well know, videotaping the terror attacks. I'm almost verbatim quoting from the FBI assessment of this.
So I'm not sure if this part here, if he's referring to the image of what was described as the dancing Israelis. I'm not sure if that's who he's referring to. I don't know, but that's probably who he's referring to. But that in itself, like that to me never made any sense either. Like that they were questioned, they were taken in and they were questioned and just like let go. Like, why were they happy? Why were they dancing? Why were they? I never understood that. And it's just weird to me that like that was just like let go. Like just like boop, bond, nothing to see here. Bye. Like, really? You know, it's just, and I want to tell you guys, if you haven't seen it, if it's still on Hulu, look it up. It's called The Looming Tower. And if you have time, watch it, because some of the things that I was just like, Why didn't we know about some of these things at that point in time? Like that the FBI, one guy in particular that was working for the FBI, was getting very, very close. Now, I think his name was John. I have to check. I think his name was John. He died in one of the towers. Now, he was able to get out at first, but he went back in to help other people get out to safety, and he ended up dying in one of the towers. Look him up. You can find out. He's on Wikipedia. Just search John FBI looming tower 9/11. He'll come up. I forget his last name. Somebody in the chat probably knows. But he was getting very close. And from what I gathered, it seemed like if he would have had the information that the CIA had, that probably wouldn't have happened based on the information I saw, not just in that show, but also what I read afterwards. It does seem like O'Neill, thank you, John O'Neill. It seems like if he had that information from the CIA, it seems like he that could have been prevented. And that's one of the frustrating things when you're watching that show and then you look up the information for yourself, you're like, oh my God, that really was true. So it's frustrating. So I think this docuseries definitely does need to be published. It does need to be released.
And the FBI determined that they apparently had foreknowledge of the attacks. So why can't we know more about that? Exactly. Shut up. That's bigoted. No, this is my country. Actually, I know people who died on 9/11. Everything was changed because of it. I promptly went off to the Middle East, just like everyone else in our business. I'm sure you did as well. And then we lost our civil liberties at home. We immediately started torturing people and locking up people for years. They are still locked up in Guantanamo Bay with no charges at all.
And also, there was a strong rise of Islamophobia after September 11 as well. And this is something, I think if you weren't born during this time, or maybe you were very young, you would not be aware of unless you read about it or heard about it later on. At that point in time, I don't think this was a good place to be for Muslim Americans, for Arab Americans. There was a lot of Islamophobia after September 11. And I just knew people that did not feel safe. And I understood why. And I think that when I look at how we've kind of grown in ways like the things that people were saying about Arab Americans at that time, the things that people were saying about Muslim people at that time. And then I look at how many of us decided to hit the streets and rise up for people in Gaza. That gives me some hope that there are changes that are happening. But I would say during that time, if you were Muslim American in the United States, especially if you were wearing like a hijab, I would say it was not a safe place for you to be at that point in time.
And the rest of us, very much me included, nodded our heads and are like, yeah, they're bad. They're Muslim terrorists. Now, I think a lot of them were bad and they were Muslim terrorists. On the other hand, if your government is allowed to torture people and lock them up indefinitely without charging them, how long before they do that to you? We don't do that here. And I know it's very common in the UK now, which is an authoritarian country. We don't want that here. And 9/11 dramatically changed our assumptions about what the government is allowed to do. So, and by the way, I should say, the main beneficiary in the United States of those attacks was the CIA, which allowed them to happen. So the CIA budget became, more than doubled. Of course, we're not allowed to know what the CIA budget is, even in government. This is a fact, by the way. If you ask a high-level official at the White House currently, what's the CIA's full budget? They can't tell you. It is a secret that is so closely guarded that even people in charge of administering the government don't know what their budget is. But Tucker, it's more than twice what it was before 9/11.
Okay, but what you're
So one thing to keep in mind is that Tucker can kind of get away with saying some of these things because, and I guess, not get targeted because from what I understand, his father was, CIA. So just that's something to keep in mind, that he can kind of go places the rest of us can't go. Just to be honest with you, at one point, I remember Tucker Carlson said that he thought about joining the CIA, like when he was younger or whatever, but just keep that in mind, folks. Because I think sometimes people see these things and they're like, oh, well, Tucker Carlson did it, so I can do it too. Like, some people are protected. Never forget that.
You're suggesting with your phraseology about that is that the CIA were part of a kind of inside track knowledge about what may happen, which is obviously an incredibly serious
No, I'm not
charge.
suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that. I'm stating the facts, which are that the CIA was fully aware that many of these hijackers were here, that those visas were issued in a country with which we have very close security service cooperation at a time when John Brennan was running a station there.
But that's different to saying that they knew what was going to happen.
Well, they actually did know that these people were planning a terror attack because they surveilled a meeting planning it in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia a year before, and then followed the guy as he came to the United States and arrived in San Diego for flight training. So again, I'm not guessing about any of this. These are established facts. There's no person, including then CIA Director George Tenet, who would deny this. They'll say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Okay, fine, whatever, attack my character as you will, but tell me how I'm wrong. And of course, I'm not wrong. So
well,
I'm not alleging or suggesting anything.
I'm not saying you're right or wrong or anything.
And they were from Saudi Arabia, right? But we went to war with Iraq. It was a question I even had at that time. I was like, why are we going? What? Saudi Arabia was an ally of the United States and still is an ally of the United States. But that question, like if you were to ask people that question, people were just kind of like, but it didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, okay, so they were from Saudi Arabia, but we're going to war against Iraq? And people would say, well, yeah, we're going to war with Iraq because Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. I'm like, okay, what does that have to do with September 11th? You can ask those questions back then. People got to understand, like the people who came out against the Iraq war during that time were brave. People lost their jobs. Like I told you, Phil Donahue, talk show host, he lost his job because he was against the war in Iraq. Told you the Dixie Chicks got canceled. I think they're now just the Chicks. It's easier to talk about it now, but during that time, Then we get into the Israel part. Listen to this. He is asking him if he thinks that Israel is a terrorist state.
At the hands of the IDF. There are many on the pro-Palestinian side who say that Israel is behaving like terrorists too in the way that they have gone about conducting this war. Would you go as far as to say that?
One of the things that I really object to now is this relentless focus on Israel, which, by the way, is a foreign country that I have nothing to do with other than having been a visitor there and really enjoyed it. And it's now at the center of the conversation in my country when my country is degrading at high speed. We have a lot of concerns here. I just resent the kind of solipsism that pulls everything back to the concerns of a foreign country. And that's the litmus test for everything. Well, is Israel bad? How dare you say that? Are you going to go out on a limb and criticize Israel? What about my country? Every country commits terror because leaders, drunk on hubris, imagine that they can do things that no human being is permitted to do. And first,
there it is. He said every country. That includes Israel. Pierce doesn't like that comment.
First on that list is killing people who didn't do anything wrong. That is the ultimate sin. And it happens in every country, in every period. Of course, Israel meets that definition. I mean, obviously, but so does my government. And not always. And I think we try harder. Certainly, we try harder than Israel is trying. But we have definitely done that. And it's not controversial to say that. It's not controversial to say that things the U.S. government has done have intentionally murdered people who didn't do anything wrong. People are like, yeah, that's right. But you say that about Benjamin Netanyahu, who has nothing to do with me at all. I don't live there. I don't want to live there. I've got nothing to do with that. Then you're somehow a criminal. That whole frame to me is insane, and I'm not participating with it. Israel is not the litmus test. How you feel about your own country, what you do to improve or degrade your own country, that's the litmus test for me. Not how you feel about some foreign country, period.
Well, let me.
And then he said, period. He did the period, you guys. He said the period. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, I will say this. You guys can watch the rest of that on Pierce Morgan's channel, but I did just want to say I hope that docuseries is still being released. And it could have something to do with, Charlie Kirk's death. Maybe that's why it was not released for Thursday as planned. But like I said, people have questions, man. People have questions. And if our government didn't hide things from us, people wouldn't have all these questions. I don't think that, I've said this before, I don't think anything to do with military and all this kind of stuff, these wars, everything that's happened, assassinations, etc. I don't think any of those things should be classified. I think we have a right to know. That's my take on that. And speaking of Charlie Kirk, one thing I do want to say, I already made a video about that and posted that video earlier this morning, but I do want to give an update here for those of you on social media. I just want to let you know, I wasn't kidding when I said that the establishment would look for a way to use this to censor more, go after people more, etc. I have already been told in private, and I've already seen a couple of these happen already on social media, that companies are being told to fire people depending on how they responded or reacted to the death of Charlie Kirk. Ron DeSantis has said that he will suspend teachers in Florida depending on how they respond. There are a number of accounts on X that are reporting people. So what I will tell you guys, be very careful. And I've said this so many times, be very careful what you post on social media, right? So I don't want anyone to lose their job. I really don't. But just in general, be very careful what you post on social media. But this is what I predicted earlier today when I made that video, was that they're going to increase police state, surveillance state, censorship, etc. So be careful, guys. Be careful. Let's get that poll. All right. Thank you for the poll, honey buns. We have 1,841 votes. Do you believe the narrative about September 11? 5% said yes. 80%, that's a strong 80%. 80% said hell no. 8% said somewhat, but I have questions. And 8% said, I don't know. Interesting. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.